Well, good morning, County Council. Welcome back after a long 2 years. Hopefully everybody has their pants on this morning, not like at home. And I'll ask Mr. Tifo to take the roll call, please.
Yes, thank you, Warden. Councillor Arnold, please. Present. Thank you. Councillor Bird. Present. Thank you. Councillor Bouchy. Thank you. Councillor Bradley. I see Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Broad.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Cook. Present. Thank you. Councillor Ferguson. Present. Thank you. Deputy Warden Hand. Present. Thank you. Councillor Loosely. Present. Thank you. Councillor Miller. Present. Thank you. Councillor Napper.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Romboats. Present. Thank you. Councillor Stark.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Veen. Present. Thank you. Councillor Weber. Present. Thank you. Councillor White.
Present.
Thank you, Councillor White, and of course, Warden Marriott. We have a quorum. Just before we enter into the meeting, just a few comments for this meeting and the proceeding of the meeting. Of course, as Warden Marriott noted, I think this is our first meeting, hybrid meeting, albeit over the course of the last 2 years. And over the course of that last 2 years, this group has met 59 times online, and when you count all your council meetings, your special meetings, the election of the warden, and of course your committee meetings, so you've met 59 times online, and that went extremely well. We appreciate that there are some of you meeting here in person today, and of course some of you who are online. We as staff appreciate that mix of participation because it allows us to play around a little bit and experiment with the technology. Speaking of technology, there are many cameras in the room. If you wish to speak, and once you're identified by the warden, please press on your mic. Once you press on your mic, the camera will focus on you. Once you're done speaking, press your mic off, and then the camera will then pan elsewhere. In terms of the use of masks, that's really optional. It's up to you. We always recommend the use of masks, but the use of masks is optional. And in terms of being recognized by the warden, we ask that, as in the past, that you raise your hands, and once you're recognized by the warden, that you be provided the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Mr. Tifo. We acknowledge that this land on which we are gathered today is part of the ancestral land of the Chippewa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi peoples, referred to collectively as the Anishinaabe. It is through the connection of the Anishinaabe with the spirit of the land, water, and air that we recognize their unique cultures, traditions, and values. Together as treaty people, we have a shared responsibility to act with respect for the environment that sustains all life, protecting the future for those generations to come. I'd ask any member of council to declare pecuniary interest if they have any, or at the time that it arises. Seeing none now, I'd ask for a motion to go in camera, please. Moved by Deputy Warden Hand and seconded by Councillor Loosely. All in favor? It's carried. Thank you. Good morning again. Welcome back. Welcome to the public that's joining us for our first in-person meeting in over 2 years. I'd ask Mr. Chifo to rise and report from in camera, please.
Yes, thank you, Warden Marriott. This morning, County Council met in camera for a period of 16 minutes to address 3 issues. 1, to approve in-camera minutes of its meeting of February 2nd, 2022. Secondly, to approve in-camera minutes of its Committee P.M. meeting of February 16th, 2022. And thirdly, to discuss a property matter located in the City of Sarnia.
Okay, thank you for that. Item number 7, Board of Health. Our update from our Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Renaday. I see him in the audience. Come forward, please, Dr. Renaday. Morning. Just use your mic there, please.
Can you hear me? Oh, wow. Okay. All right. It's very different. Yeah, right. Okay, so since I can hear myself, I know you can hear me fine. This feels very surreal, so I'll start with that, right? I think it's been a long time since we've all been together in person, and so recognizing that there are different people and different sensitivities around in-person behavior, just, I think the key message is everybody, however you feel about it, it's okay, right? And then we have to talk to each other about how we feel about personal interactions and respect people's need for distance if that's what they need, respect people's need for that feeling that this is okay, right? So I'll just start with that. In terms of an update, this and other signs around us are kind of evidence that we're moving to a place of integrating COVID into the things that we do, right? That's what we're talking about now. We're not talking about treating COVID as a separate thing out here. We're talking about having it be a risk that is ongoing, something that is happening around us and that we have to integrate into the activities that we have. And so that doesn't mean that what we're doing now is going to be what we do constantly, right? There may need to be changes to the situation. There may need to be changes to what happens, but as those things happen, they will be grounded in either there's a new variant or something else is happening, and we'll talk to you about that. But here's broadly what's happening right now. In the last, we had an update on Monday that talked about having 79 cases since the last update. So remember, every time we talk about cases, that is an underestimate of what the actual proportion of cases in the community is, because it is based on the tests that we receive, which are PCR lab-based tests, right? The other tests that people do, if they do a rapid test in the community, that's not reportable to us, or if they're symptomatic and don't get tested and have COVID, that's not a way that we would not know that either, right? So every number that we get now in terms of cases, think about it as an underestimate. So we look at some other signals. What are the other signals? So around Ontario, wastewater signals are moving upwards, right? That means more people are shedding the virus in a manner that we can detect. And so that is an indication that cases are going up. And the other indication is that hospitalizations across the province are also going up. And that's important to remember, right? Hospitalizations are an indicator of severity, and it comes late in the course of disease. So what you have to look at now is a few things. 1, can the hospital system function under the current strain and also take care of other hospital-related business? And the other piece is, recognizing that this is going to come and go in waves, you will start to see, as long as there are no new variants. So everything that I'm saying now comes with this massive caveat, right? So let's talk about the caveat and then we'll talk about the rest. The caveat is that most of the world, it remains unvaccinated. And as long as that is true, you create the conditions under which new variants could arise, right? And when those new variants arise, as we've seen with Delta and Omicron and whatnot, you have to decide how severe are they, how transmissible are they, and how much protection do you get from being vaccinated. So that's out here, and we're going to pay attention to that. But for now, what we see, or what we will see, is sort of ongoing Omicron waves, right? Because what we're going to see is it go through different parts of the population who are interacting largely through social connections and being exposed to the disease. 2 things that are important to remember. 1, that And I think that we've all talked about how prevalent it is and how transmissible it is. That really the key message here is that delaying or avoiding exposure to COVID now requires substantial ongoing changes to your social behavior. And for some people, they might actually be willing to do that. And that's reasonable. But at the level of the population, those changes are not particularly sustainable, right? And that is why we're moving to a model of integrating the risk and acknowledging that the burden of disease in a highly vaccinated population from COVID starts to approach, it's not quite there yet, but it approaches the burden of influenza, okay? So what that means is every year people die from influenza. Every year people are hospitalized from influenza. We will continue to see that with COVID, right? There will be instances of that, but they will be lower in frequency and lower in absolute numbers over time, right? So that's important to remember. And finally, the last piece really is that when we look at the residual risk, what I mean by residual risk is people who have been fully vaccinated. What is the burden of disease in that population, right? We are still reporting fatalities, and that's important to remember. And when we look at those fatalities, what we see is by and large, those people, if they are immunized, are over 80 or significantly immunocompromised. So they've had an organ transplant, something like that, right? But not the other things that we think of as being immunocompromised. So with that in mind, there are upcoming recommendations, I think they've actually come out already, about offering additional booster doses to certain populations. And so we'll move through that as it's announced and offer those doses. But the real group who is at increased risk, even if they've been vaccinated, are people who are over 80 and people who are immune compromised severely with not a lung transplant, but an organ transplant, or some other conditions where they might be on significant immunosuppression through medication, right? So, and that, may not be a risk that we can do that much about, except for offering them additional boosters. So we're going to do that. And boosters will also roll out as well through the rest of the population, just by the way that these things work. But I just want to emphasize or highlight where the real residual risk is here. And then thinking about the future or the rest of the year, I anticipate that there would be a need for reboosting in the general population. Although we'll offer it now, I think there'll be a real need to reboost in the general population before the fall. So we've talked a little bit about cases. We have 5 institutional outbreaks at this point. Again, you're seeing the severity of those outbreaks really change dramatically compared to what we used to see. And in terms of vaccinations, I think I've told you sort of where we're going. There's some hopes that we'll see more integrated vaccines, like maybe you can get your flu shot combined with your COVID shot in one shot, but I don't think that that's coming up, imminently. So when we hear more about that, we'll let you know.
Thank you for that, Dr. Renaday. Are there any questions? Wow, I guess you were very thorough, Dr. Renaday.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Item number 8, delegations. I'd ask for a motion to allow a presenter to come within the rail, please. Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Loosely. All in favor? That's carried. So our delegation, just one today, Kathy Alexander, Executive Director, Bluewater Health Foundation, and Jack Vanderveen, Director, Biomedical Engineering and Support Services. Come forward, please. Oh, you're online.
I'm not sure how you come forward by a computer screen, but we'll try our best.
That's close enough.
We're coming. Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see that you're gathering in person. I wish Jack and I had planned better. We would have come out and joined you, but thank you so much for having us today. We are here to take some of your time to provide an update to County Council on the very exciting progress being made on the helipad project. So first and foremost, I'm Kathy Alexander, Executive Director of Bluewater Health Foundation. I'm sure most of you know that I am the director of the organization that's role is to raise important funds for our Lambton County's community hospital, Bluewater Health. With me down the hall, actually, is my colleague. I'd like to refer to him as my partner in crime because I'm always asking him for a lot of information and questions, is Jack Vanderveen. He's the Director of Biomedical Engineering and Support Services at Bluewater Health. and really is leading the important work with a great team behind him on the helipad project. So we're very grateful to the county for their generous investment into this project that we know will make a tremendous difference and impact on patients and their ability to quickly access care that may be life-saving for many in certain circumstances. So with that, I am going to pass it over to my partner, Jack, and we look forward to providing this update to all of you this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy, and good morning. Yes, I'm Jack Vanderveen, Director of Biomedical Engineering and Support Services at Bluewater Health, and we're very excited to be able to talk to you about this project this morning, share some updates with you where we are right now, and give some credit to our team that's working really hard behind the scenes to keep this project moving. At present, sorry, we have a rough diagram here. So I shouldn't say rough. This is really a finalized diagram of what the facility will look like. It does have some extras on it though. The parking lot that you see just to the east of the proposed helipad site is not going to be put in. We just wanted to see what the feasibility was to put something else around the helipad. We know we're going to need parking in the future, so we put that in as an option. But this, other than the parking lot, is what the site layout will look like. You can see where the former St. Pat's track used to sit here. That will be removed at the first phases of this project, as well as the location of the helipad and the paths in and out for the flight directions for Orange to take to get to that site. Also indicated here on the northwest side is the walk path, or the gurney push as we call it, to the hospital. Part of this project will be a modification to the building to create a safe ramp and entry into the end of the building. And this will be a run down the corridor to the emerge department or to our ICU. This outdoor push is 175 meters long, which does sound like it's a long ways, and it is fairly long, but it's a lot shorter than many of them in the province. And we will be widening that path to make sure it's a safe travel as well. Community engagement has been very important throughout this project. We've had ongoing communications with our neighbors around the site. Hannah Memorial School, which you, if you noticed in that diagram, was just to the west of where the helipad will sit. The school board has been very involved, elected officials, and the Sarnia Track Club. We've had a lot of engagement. And we've also had ongoing engagement with Orange, who has been to site and will be doing site visits throughout the project, as well as Transport Canada, who at this point has just been advised that the project is going. They do not do any site visits or certification until the end of the project, when it's actually done and ready to be put into operation. And then we have ongoing engagement with you as the county and the City of Sarnia. And again, I just want to express much appreciation to you as a county council for accepting our time here and for the great donation that you've made to this project. As far as the timeline, the letter of no objection from the City of Sarnia was received on March 24th. We have awarded a construction tender that was done through an RFP process and awarded to Jaden Construction on March 25th. Groundbreaking construction is to be decided. We do have a meeting on the 11th to start establishing that timeline with Jaden Construction and our consultant, Aviotech. The new track at Great Lakes Secondary, part of the communication around this, because the track has been coming out planned to come out has been a very sensitive subject. We've tried to coordinate it with the opening of the track at Great Lakes Secondary, which is behind schedule, and now it does not look like it will be open till summer, but we don't have a definite timeline on that. The helipad construction is expected to be completed in August. We'll do some demo flights with Orange at that point, more for engagement of the neighbors and the community and the school next door to understand what that looks like, sounds like, do some education. And we expect to be certified with Transport Canada for October of 2022. And then we'll do an official opening ribbon cutting at that point. As far as the budget, we had originally proposed $800,000. After working through the project with our consultant, it did come in over that, totaled $912,000. Again, we show the county committed funding of $400,000 there, and the foundation commitment is $512,000. And Kathy can talk a little bit further at the end of this about how that's looking. And I guess maybe Kathy, I'll pass it over to you now to just give an update of what that fundraising looks like.
Absolutely. So thank you, Jack, and thank you again for your to the county for their generous support of the helipad project. I think you can see from the budget that it's a significant investment, and the project wouldn't be where it is at without your tremendous support. So we're incredibly grateful and continue to be very thankful to that commitment. We are actually actively fundraising throughout the community to raise the additional 500 and some change towards the remainder of the project. We've had a lot of exciting conversations. We have a lot of work being done from a donor engagement perspective, and similar to the community engagement the hospital has been doing, we've been doing something similar in tandem with our generous community and partners and donors. So we are actively working towards that. We have some materials that will be coming out into the community, really in coordination with the efforts of Jack and his team to make sure that the community is as informed as they deserve to be, and also how they can help, because we cannot do this without an incredible and generous community. And we know, I think all of you around the room and on your computers know what a wonderful and generous community Lambton County is made up of. So we are looking forward to completing the project. We're looking forward to celebrating the ribbon cutting with all of those who have made this a reality. And I think what's really exciting, and we shared this, I believe, the first time we came and talked about the project, is that Lambton County is one of the few communities that does not have a helipad at the current state. And really adding this to our repertoire, or our toolkit of what we're able to provide to patients and their families across Lambton County really only enhances access to care. And that's what's really important, is enhancing that for our patients and their families, and ensuring that they have access in a very quick manner if that is needed to be sought out from a treatment perspective. So we are very thankful. We're actively fundraising. We cannot do it without the support of a tremendous community, and you are a part of that tremendous community. So on behalf of the foundation and our board of directors, we are grateful to all of you. And I don't know, Jack, if you have anything else to add, but we would be happy to open it up for questions from the floor, if there are any for us.
Okay.
And all the hard ones need to go to Jack.
Thank you very much, Kathy and Jack. That was a very good update and report. Are there any questions for them? Councillor Bradley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Warden, and the group for the presentation. You mentioned that you were deferring or eliminating a parking lot. How big was that? And is it because of the, what's unfortunately happening to all of us, the cost increases?
Yeah, so the parking lot is actually, it's empty field right now. We expect in the future we'll have to put a parking lot in. We're deferring it because of the cost right now. It just, we're going to plan for it in the next 5 years. We know that we have an expansion to our addictions program coming. We will need more parking at some point in time. So we wanted to make sure that it would fit into the field as well, along with the helipad, and not interfere with its operating. So that's the only reason it's being deferred. Funding will be sought down the road for that project.
Would it be better, though, not better to do it now? Because so many times when things are deferred, they're deferred to the 12th of never.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, preference, of course, is always to do it now. We know costs are going to go up, but it's not high on the priority list. There's a lot of other projects around the facility that we really need to be fundraising for, and that will come as part of the addictions program down the road, I think, but it's not high priority right now.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you. And any other questions? Councillor Napper, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Warden Marriott. A question to Kathy. I don't know. Right now, if somebody has to use a helicopter, you have to get an ambulance and take them out to the airport. Is that correct? And then you go. Is anybody looking into what the savings is going to be to the EMS there with the over a year in this thing? It was just a thought I had sitting here.
I'm not sure who would answer that.
I would defer that to my colleague, Jack. But I do know that there are definitely savings, and even that notion of the importance of time from a patient perspective is even probably more important than the cost savings, to be quite honest. But I'll let Jack respond to that.
Yeah, there is a definite cost savings, but there's also a resource savings. Quite often, helicopter isn't even available. They have to drive to London, which takes EMS right out of operation, at least one vehicle in the area. So response time in the area suffers, as well as we do suffer with staff having to travel with them at the same time. So it's going to be a resource savings on the staffing side and the cost side for sure. I don't have the numbers, but I know there is a financial savings. The payback is there.
Not to put him on the spot, but does Mr. Taylor have any comment on that?
No, certainly. I could just comment that with respect to cost and savings, I can tell you that between, I believe the data is from 2016, 2017, we have done as a service for EMS over 224 patient transfers to London, and on average between University Hospital in London and Victoria, that's about 2 hours and 35 minutes each way, and more time including offloading. So there is significant savings, and this mandate surely aligns with our views of improving patient outcomes. So we're quite excited about the project.
Thank you. Any other questions for Councillor Napper?
Yeah, just a follow-up. I see EMS is coming right up behind you there. I imagine next year we'll certainly see that savings in their budget when it comes down. And just a thought.
I think with the increasing demand on service, though, it's hopefully will ease the increase that we've seen. So, any other questions? Seeing none, I want to thank Kathy and Jack again for your very detailed report and to us, and look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you so much for having us.
Have a great day.
Okay, moving on to item number 9, staff presentation. We have Mr. Stephen Turner, Manager, Emergency Medical Services, with Todd McDonald and John Prono, Consultant. And I see they're coming online now. Welcome, Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. And through you to Council, I'd like to introduce you to Todd McDonald and John Pernod of Performance Concepts. As you'll recall, in March 2021, Council directed that the strategic plans performance concepts reported from the 2014 be updated and by completing an operations review. So this presentation will give you an overview of their findings. As you'll note as well, there is a staff report in item 14A where we'll expand on the findings and recommendations from the consultant. But at this time, I'll pass the presentation over to Mr. McDonald and Mr. Veen.
Thank you very much, and good morning, members of council. With your indulgence, I'm going to share my screen to move through the gist of the presentation. Just want to confirm that that screen is visible. He says, hopefully. Yep. So let me start quickly by sort of recapping the approach that Performance Concepts took to the assignment. As with all of our EMS system performance work that we do across Ontario, we started with the data, with the evidence. And so we executed a pretty in-depth review of EMS performance analytics, looking at aspects of response times, call volumes, system busyness, and we'll share a little bit of that with you in just a moment. We moved on to the all-important question of call heat mapping, looking from a mapping perspective at where the work is done across Lambton and which resources actually do that work. From there, with a fairly clear understanding, a snapshot, if you will, of current performance, we moved on to a dialogue with your frontline medics, a very productive dialogue. We supplemented that dialogue to understand their performance concerns with a peer comparison of peer jurisdictions. We moved on to deal with, and I'll explain this in detail in a moment, some extra analysis around Code 8 movement. Stay tuned, we'll explain that. And then we progressed on to our findings and recommendations. So this is a pretty standardized approach that we take, an evidence-based approach to the work. So it's important to understand from a scope management point of view, this was not a master plan. So our work was not future oriented. We weren't necessarily looking at future growth in population and in demand on call volumes. And we all understand, I think, the reality of the aging tsunami in Ontario, that back-end baby boomers like yours truly are year by year moving into the population cohorts of 65 years of age or greater that are really the engine of call volume demand across Ontario. And we often do this sort of work, but in this particular case, our review was focused on the current operational problem solving. This piece around the positioning and relocation of bases potentially, which is part of a classic master plan, was also not part of our scope. So that's what our review was. And, importantly, it explains in some respects what it was not. So on to the question of performance analytics. Start with some pretty conventional stuff, looking at code 1 to 4 call volumes. Of course, code 4 calls are the particular focus, the lights and sirens on emergency dispatched calls. And the conclusion that I would suggest that we take from this information is that the pandemic has not really materially dampened, contrary to some of the mythology, the pandemic has not really dampened workload moving across the pandemic. So once we annualize that partial data for October for 2021, we would see this trend of consistent or growing workload over time. Not surprising, given the steady impacts of the aging tsunami. In terms of Code 4 dispatched response times, average response times, we can look at these in terms of the urban and the non-urban aspects of your system. So in the bottom figure, you can see across the hours of the day, the average dispatched Code 4 response times for Sarnia. You can see across the hours of the day, we're generally holding those response times for the most part under 6 minutes, achieving your targeted response times. And in the non-Sarnia stations across the rest of the system, we're looking at response times that run, certainly well below 9 minutes, often below 8.5 minutes. So these are stable, perfectly acceptable response times for your service that are in line with the targeted level of response that your management team is hoping for. Now, system busyness is an extremely important metric as well, and these numbers, again, across the 24 hours of the day, we've looked at from a Sarnia and a non-Sarnia perspective. This is patient-related workload. Let's be clear. So this is the in-service time when the system is dealing with either getting to patients, taking care of patients at the scene, and moving patients to hospital. And the key here is to look at the peak hours of busyness. These curves are very typical across Ontario EMS systems. Relatively less busy overnight, climbing busyness through the morning hours, and then a long period of peak system busyness with a slight diminishment in the evening period. In the Sarnia data especially, the industry has a consensus that system busyness exceeding 40% starts to move you into a risk zone of deteriorating performance. As we're pinballing around, sooner or later we end up with a call where the ambulance is just in the wrong place for the next call. And so when we hit that sort of zone of concern of 40% or above, that is typically a trigger for considering new resources. And you can see here in the case of Sarnia, in the peak hours of the day, we're just nestling up to that peak busyness level of 40%. So we're ringing the bell here and we're saying, have due concern for those peak hours of busyness numbers. The non-Sarnia stations don't approach those levels of busyness during peak hours, and their overnight levels of busyness are actually quite low. So no system busyness bell ringing outside of the Sarnia stations, but we're right at that level with those stations. So keep that in mind as we go forward. This is just the patient-oriented workload. There is other workload that we're going to talk about in a moment that cumulatively adds to that. But before we get to that, I'm going to ask my colleague and our EMS practice lead, former EMS Chief John Pernot, to walk you through some of the call heat mapping work that we did. A couple of quick highlights here, and in the report, you'll see that we did quite a detailed amount of work station by station, but we've pulled out a couple of highlights to make the point here. So John, I'll throw that one up and I'll hand it over to you.
Good morning. And this is just a generic slide that shows you where EMS does their work in Lambton County and the City of Sarnia. And you can see the Sarnia bubble is where the bulk of the work is, but there are some hot spots, and hot spots are areas that have a significant number of calls in on a given point on the map, if you like. So we're looking, if you're seeing that red, we're looking at about 15 calls on a given point in a map over the time period that we look at this. So this was about 3 years worth of data that we looked at here. So you see Petrolia, and you see Forest, and you see Kettle Point, and then some subtler, warm spots, if you like, in Thedford that you can see, and Grand Bend and the like there. So this just gives you a generic view of where the work is being done. The next slide. Sarnia, of course, part of the work that we were asked to do was to determine whether Sarnia acts as an EMS magnet, dragging in resources from other service locations, other stations, if you like. This shows you that there is a lot of work done in Sarnia, and for the most part, the response times are very reasonable. You see a lot of light blue and darker blue there that's telling you the response times are under 6 minutes, or the travel times are under 6 minutes that are there. And you can see as you crest along the lake that the response times get a little longer as you go out there. You can see just from the speckling of vehicles that Sarnia vehicles aren't sent out to do work in other areas very often. And when they do, it's sort of luck of the draw. They're on they've done a call to a particular area, and a merge call happens to come in, and that's why they get tagged for these calls. So that's the scattering of other calls that you see there on the map. We wanted to give you an example with Petrolia, because this is a really good example of how the work evolves. So this is showing where the workload is for Petrolia-based ambulances. In this case, as you can see, the majority of the work is in Petrolia, and there's a little bit of work in Wyoming, and you can see a faint bit of work in Sarnia. And we took this to a little bit more detail to give you an idea of how much they were getting dragged into Sarnia, if you like. So this chart basically shows you where the work is done by that Petrolia-based ambulance. So in this case, you can see the majority of the work is in Petrolia itself, a little less in the Brigden area, Watford area, but you can see Sarnia totals about 12 calls over this period of time. And this was, if I'm not mistaken, the 3-year period that there were calls that they were sent to Sarnia proper to do a call only 12 times. So we didn't, when we found this story the same for other Lambton stations, it wasn't a big draw of their resources into Sarnia. There were movements for standbys, and Todd will talk about that in a second. But from a magnet point of view for actual calls in the Sarnia area, we didn't find that was happening. Todd?
Yeah, and again, John, to your point, we replicated this kind of analysis for each of the other Lambton stations, and a very similar chart to this is embedded in our deeper technical report, coming to the same conclusion that the hypothesis of Sarnia as demand magnet is not reflected in the granular data of the system. So armed with this information, we knew we wanted to truth test it, stress test it, if you will, with frontline medics. Andrew Taylor made it very clear that he wanted us to engage in dialogue with the medics, and in retrospect, that was a very far-sighted decision and direction on his part, because the messaging from the medics was quite powerful and caused us pause. The medics, in their narrative, they feel that they are overworked and in fact burning out, and that the burden of workload is not sustainable. They believe that resource adds in Sarnia, reflecting some of the information we just showed you, are probably a good idea. But they also note this complicated story that looking at system busyness, those numbers that we showed you, that 40%, that only reflects the work that is firmly stapled to patients. There's this code 8 work, which is all about standby work, that they also consider to be legitimate workload, because they are bouncing around in their vehicles according to the code 8 movement of vehicles that the system undertakes when the system gets busy. So as the system gets busy over the course of the day, ambulances are redeployed from their station locations to alternate locations where the system managers are of the view that the next likely call would probably happen. So we're playing a probabilities game. We're moving ambulances around based on the probability of where the next call might happen. And so many of the units outside of Sarnia are engaged actively on a daily basis in this sort of predictive movement of ambulances to alternate locations. And so the combination of the patient-bearing workload plus all the time in the rig moving around in this code 8 coverage for the next call certainly adds to the paramedics' very legitimate perception of workload. And so when they say we're in our rigs so often, moving around or taking care of patients, that we can't get to the meal and washroom breaks, and our workload feels unsustainable. There's evidence to support that. And, they quite readily and appropriately pointed out that the in-service time taking care of patients is only part of the busyness story. And so they have to do the code 1 to 4 work, plus they are actively engaged, they said, in the code 8 work. Now, we heard them, we listened carefully and respectfully, and we decided, okay, we got to go back and do some more work. So we hit the analytics trail again with some supplemental analytics beyond what we were originally retained to do, to take this deeper dive look at what this code 8 movement actually looks like. So we started with the frequency of these movements. And John, I would invite you to chime in at any point if I miss anything or if you have an observation here. So the blue graph on this page is the code 8 movement across the whole system. All the stations, how much time do we spend moving about in this way? And you can see what that sort of trend line looks like. 2021, again, was only a partial for the year. So these are the total hours of movement at code 8 status. We then said, well, let's dig in a little deeper. And what does this look like by station? And you can see here that by station, of course, this is quite different. So the Sarnia vehicles aren't moving around a lot in code 8. They're doing a lot of work in Sarnia, patient-centered work. Brights Grove is moving around, but mostly in support of Sarnia. And then we get to the stations where the ripple effect through the day, moving units around, really becomes quite telling. And of course, that is, we're seeing that in the Corunna station, in Brigden, and in Watford as the stations that are experiencing, and to a lesser degree, Thetford as well. But we're seeing that the impact of this code 8 movement is quite uneven across the stations. So that's the frequency of how often it's happening. Yeah, so I said these are hours. Those aren't hours. This is the frequency of occurrence. This is how many times it's happening, how many times a unit is moving at code 8 status. So then we wanted to look at the duration of time spent. And each time that happens, on average across the system, you can see that, it's in excess of half an hour. So every time a unit is moved into code 8 status to move somewhere else to support the coverage in the system, it's a half an hour or longer. And it's come down a little bit, but still it's a significant amount of time. And then when you look at the amount of time at each of the stations, you can see again the length of the code 8 time per occurrence varies significantly, from almost an hour at Thetford to 50 minutes at Watford to 40 minutes at Brigden, for instance. And so overall, again, we're seeing an uneven distribution of time per occurrence, and 3 stations in particular that are spending a fair amount of time traveling, seats in the rigs, doing code 8 work. So that was average per occurrence. When we total this up across a year, in 2020, for instance, we can, again, the uneven burden of code 8 movement on particular stations becomes crystal clear. And of course, we can see that Brigden and Watford and Thetford are the ambulances at these stations are bearing a disproportionate amount of this busyness burden added on to the patient-centric workload across the various stations. So guess what? The medics were right. The medics were right that there is significant workload burden beyond their patient-focused work involved in this code 8 movement to try and predict where the next call would come. So this deeply informed our work and the storyline that we developed in our recommendations. The first of which is that, you know, the system over time now, with the combination of aging tsunami, call volume demand, an increasing propensity in the population to call 911, that there are peak hours of the day that the Sarnia resources are drifting into that 40% system busyness range. That is that 40% of every hour is spent on a call rather than waiting for a call. And so we are about to breach that unofficial boundary. And given the impact of a 10-year demand forecast, it's certain that you're going to breach that 40% UHA boundary in the not distant future. And proactively recognizing the growth that's coming, we have recommended a dedicated 12-hour vehicle should be deployed across the peak hours of the day, Monday to Sunday, and that the detailed scheduling of that unit should be the responsibility of management to decide what the right 12-hour coverage period for that unit should be. But this is the first resource add in quite some time that we feel is supported by the evidence of workload. We also believe that that 10-year demand forecast is really important to Lambton EMS as you build out sort of a de facto master plan. In other words, the targeting of service adds should be tightly linked to the forecast of calls and required in-service time. And while our report has dealt with the current operational framework, this future-oriented piece needs to be added into your arsenal of tools. And so we're recommending this 10-year demand forecast should be developed without delay, and it will generate the call volume triggers from a planning point of view going forward. And again, this is a standard part of a full service master plan. The whole question around Code 8 movement, which you've heard me speaking to in quite some depth here, the first question is, does it actually work? And we know, and this is not uncommon. So Lambton is not doing anything unusual here. Many Ontario EMS systems predictively move their vehicles around once they get busy during the day and they have lower levels of available units. The question in Lambton and in other jurisdictions that we're doing work for is, does this actually work? When we add to the burden of paramedics by moving them around during the day before they have patients, do we actually move them to a position where there's then a call? And if there is a call, have we moved them closer to the call, i.e. were we predictively correct? Or have we moved them farther from a call that occurred back in their base patrol area, which is where we wanted them deployed with stability? And so we're recommending that Lambton should conduct a cost-benefit analysis of their Code 8 movements as part of their deployment plan. And it should address the effectiveness of Code 8 movements in managing response times. We know it's a burden on the medics. It's one thing if it's a burden that improves system performance by getting us closer to the next call. It's quite another thing if we're moving them around and no calls are happening, or even worse, the calls are happening in areas that we vacated when we were doing the Code 8 movements. So we think this is an important piece to inform the ongoing modernization of your deployment plan. In a more immediate sense, dealing with the burden of work that Code 8 is creating and that we've confirmed with our deep dive analytics, we think rotation is a tool that you should be considering. We know that there are certain high movement stations at Brighton and Thetford and Watford and Brights Grove, and we think that rotation of medics in and out of those stations is a way of distributing that work burden associated with Code 8 movement. Now, we can't necessarily move the burden off of those stations, but we can certainly share the burden across differing paramedics. by having paramedics rotate in and out of those stations in a more standardized fashion. So moving forward, and we've tried to keep this timely, and of course we can answer questions as required. This isn't a master plan. You need to fill in the blank with the 10-year demographics-driven forecast, and we need to integrate the 10-year demand forecast with the work from this review to really create your de facto master plan. And carrying on that demand forecast work and the Code 8 review in a timely fashion will position you so that at the end of this term of council, there will be a master plan, a de facto master plan in place to continue to support resourcing decisions moving forward. And on the question of resourcing decisions, we have had an opportunity to review the staff report. We concur with the findings of the staff report and that it accurately reflects our work. And our work is supportive of the resource add proposed in that report. So with that, Chair and members of council, I'll turn the floor back over, and I will bring our presentation back down again, but that we're happy to answer any questions you think appropriate.
Thank you, gentlemen. Yes, we have two questions. First, Councillor White, and then Councillor Rumbouts.
Thank you, Warden Merritt. Thank you for the presentation. Appreciate the work and attention to detail that went into this. So just wanted to say that first. If I can go back to slide 8, I'm not sure, you don't have to put it up on the screen or anything for my colleagues and the presenters. The response times indicated on this map. So the slide is entitled Sarnia EMS Demand Magnet, just for my colleagues here. You referenced the north end showing some significant response times. Red, the exclamation marks buried within that. Seems very unusual to me as a layperson, especially given that Brights Grove does have a station there. And then looking all the way from that north end south, all the way to Brigden, it looks actually rather concerning on this map. Can you just address what's happening in that, in those instances there? And is that recommendation that you suggested, the rotation of medics through those various stations, is that to address this particular issue?
I can probably take this, Todd.
Yes.
Brights Grove in particular, that vehicle is rarely in Brights Grove. It's moving to cover Sarnia more often than not. So you end up with this deficit on the other side of the station. It can make it back to Brights Grove in a reasonable time, but it can't make it up the coast further in a reasonable time. So that's why you see that impact there. The impact across it's hard to talk about the impact across the rest of the county, except to look at particular specifics. But it's a lot of that standby movement that we're talking about, that the vehicle just isn't in the right spot when the call comes in. And that's something that, we're recommending that we do a deep dive into that and actually look at these calls call by call and see what causes them to be impacted. Is it the fact that we moved the ambulance from where it was originally based to somewhere else and ended up with a lousy response time because of something we did, not because of where the ambulance should have been based?
I guess, John, to your point, the Brights Grove ambulance is really a de facto Sarnia ambulance.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really remain stable in its patrol zone. I suppose hypothetically, if council were to agree to the staff recommendation of an additional resource in Sarnia, that would reduce, I believe, let me know if you agree, John, that would reduce the number of Code 8 movements of the Brights Grove ambulance into Sarnia and provide a little bit more or maybe a significant amount more sort of coverage stability in its sort of originating zone.
No, I agree with you fully. And I mean, we know that there's lots of building going on up that stretch of the coastline, and the call volume is just going to increase in that area. So, this is a proactive response to that.
Okay, next is Councillor Rumbouts, please.
Yeah, just referring to that same map, the Sarnia EMS demand magnet, I noticed my community isn't even on that map. So we don't seem to be taking priority in this at all. I'd like to refer my colleagues down to the chart on the number of times that it's been 20 minutes and over, and our community is substantially higher than any other community in this county. I think it's unacceptable that we have 6 calls that are over 20 minutes. And I can tell you from comments that I've heard from my community, some calls take up to an hour to be responded to. So it doesn't look as bad in the data, but when you actually put it in, like you're comparing minutes to an hour. I don't see how it's acceptable for you to take an ambulance from my community and move it out of my community into one that's closer to Sarnia, and you're leaving people in my community in peril. And I think this needs to change. I'm hoping that this recommendation will help with this, but I don't think it's fair that our community is suffering at such a large degree compared to other communities in this county, since we all pay for this service. Thank you.
Councillor Napper.
Thank you very much, Ward Mary. I believe the San McRae station there, the ambulance, I remember years ago fighting for that because we pretty much had to paint a picture of an ambulance on it to get it out in the Kamlaki area. And I thought that station was sitting there to serve us. You got force coming from the other way, and you're correct there with all the activity. And County Road 7's busy there too. So I was surprised that it services Sarnia more than what it was put out there to do.
Okay, thank you for that. Anybody care to comment on either one of those statements?
I would note that the Code 8, the deployment plan, the Lambton deployment plan, of course, values all patients across Lambton equally, and that the intention of moving ambulances via Code 8 standby is predicated on trying to predict the location of the next call. So the intentions are absolutely correct to make sure that we're positioned to minimize response times to those calls. The real world, of course, is messier than intentions or by this geographically driven deployment plan. And the recommended review, the deep dive that we're recommending, is a viable and appropriate step in continuing to tune up the movement of ambulances prior to patients being attached to that ambulance. And that evidence from that review would inform management and or council's decisions on how to modify or whether to modify the deployment plan. So there is additional evidence required. I believe the staff team shares our point of view around the efficacy of that kind of a review. And it will be important information to inform this discussion of how and when and whether ambulances should be leaving their notional patrol zones.
If I can add one more comment to that, there are very sophisticated technology solutions. There's a product called Marvelous that basically looks at all of your calls over the last 10 years and can very accurately predict where a call is likely to occur. And there are services that are using that technology to do this Code 8 movement in a very scientific way. Because our dispatch center is run by the Ministry of Health, they don't have that technology right now. So it's limited to a center in Niagara that's run by the region of Niagara. So you may hear about technology that allows you to do this more accurately, and it is out there. I don't want you to think it doesn't exist and can do this job very well. We just don't have access to it in Lambton right now.
Okay. Councillor Rombouts.
Thank you, Gordon. I'm just wondering it's great to do these studies, but when you look at the magnetized by Sarnia calls we've got and the times, our community has 6 times the amount of 20-minute plus calls than any other community, or 3 times. There's a couple here with the number 2. What are we going to do in the meantime about that? Why are the people in my community less of a priority than the rest of the county is what I'm asking. And what are we going to do in the immediate to make sure that this doesn't continue happening?
Through you, Your Worship, Councillor Rombouts. This is exactly the purpose of these reviews, is to be able to identify where these patterns occur, and so that we can create recommendations so that we can address them where they do occur. It should be noted that the service provides a service to the whole county. Code 8s, as you've heard described by the consultant, are a bit to draw a parallel to basketball. You can have one-on-one coverage, or you can have floating zone coverage. And Code 8s are really floating zone coverage. So when one moves, another ambulance moves to try and cover the intervening space. So the response times that are right there are not necessarily for the town of Watford. It's for the entire region that it covers and services, even beyond the municipal boundaries into other municipalities as well. So the geography of where it's stationed, there is a bit more distance to some of the calls that it services that leads to some of the longer response times. It doesn't necessarily mean that the community itself is having prolonged response times. It's that there are gaps in the distances between services and resources, but can also be exacerbated by those Code 8 movements. So we hope with the recommendation before you that we help to address some of these.
Follow up, Councillor Rombouts?
Yes, just to follow up. My stepmom waited 45 minutes for an ambulance, and she lives 2 minutes away from that station. So that is evidence that there is an issue. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Weber, please.
Yes, thank you, Warden, through to Council, and appreciate the update, the report, and its recommendation in here. And I would be pleased to move that and should produce a master plan undertaken before the 2023 budget. And if there's, I guess, immediate changes that could be made, that they be implemented through staff. So it's highlighted some issues here, and I would think we need to have that, what's recommended here, and I would make that a motion if that's in order.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Weber. Do we have a seconder? Wow, lots of them. Councillor Rombouts. Further discussion? Councillor Loosely.
Yeah, thank you, Warden Merritt. I'd just like to hear that motion read so we're all clear on that, please.
Sure. Mr. Tifo, did you get that?
Yes, thank you, Warden Marriott. The recommendation is on the floor. It is moved by Councillor Weaver, seconded by Councillor Rombouts. That recommendation 1, recommendation 2, recommendation 3, recommendation 4, and the report from the consultant that is currently before you be implemented and pursued in accordance with the terms of those recommendations, as well as staff take immediate actions for any other coverage issues that may arise from this review.
Okay, I think I had a question from Councillor Bradley.
I just want to ensure that there would be a public process to this master plan. It would be put out there as a proposal call.
Who would like to answer that? Or let's see, Todd or Mr. Turner, would you like to attempt that one?
Sorry, I saw Mr. Taylor prepared to answer that. His mic came on, so I'll pass to him. If not, I can continue.
Oh, sure. Mr. Taylor, please.
Thank you. Through you, Warden Marriott. Yes, I would suggest that would be incorporated into moving forward. Just as what I understand is this is the presentation and you're approving the recommendations, and then later on in the agenda we have a report that speaks to this specifically. So I'm not sure how that's going to be handled. I'll look to Stefan to maybe articulate that piece, but we would be happy to incorporate public consultation in the process we're able.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. I was going to actually say that we were going to deal with this in item number 14. So do we want to hold off until item 14?
Thank you, Warden Merritt. Yes, the recommendations that you see in this presentation are addressed in staff's report that are at item 14A of your agenda. So it'd probably be best to move your motion to that.
Okay, so that's agreeable to the mover and seconder? Thank you. Okay. Is there, before we, I guess that's, we've covered that good enough. Unless there's any, Councillor Loosley, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you, Warden Marriott. I just want to thank staff for arranging this. I want to thank both Mr. McDonald and Mr. Prono for bringing this report before us, because I think it's very important that we're all aware of this. So again, I'm just thanking them for bringing this report so we can have some good discussions. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Bird.
Thank you, Warden Marriott. I just have a quick question for the presenters. Thank you very much for your presentation. Very interesting. Looking at all the different time responses, and as other councillors have mentioned, there are some areas that really are affected. So I was just thinking, and I don't know if you've got these kind of stats, but just curious, when the 911 call comes in, what percentage of the emergency vehicles respond directly from base versus those that respond who are already on the road returning from somewhere else, another emergency? Do you have that kind of info?
Who would like to attempt that? Mr. Turner?
Go ahead, John. I know the answer. You go ahead.
Yeah, we didn't dig into it that far. That is part of what we'd suggested for the deep dive into the standbys, is looking at those calls and looking at each emergency call and seeing where it originated from. Did it originate from a station, or did it originate from a standby location or a mobile vehicle? That's a bit more work than what we were challenged with doing, but it's important stuff, and we'd be happy to do it. It's we think we can gain some valuable knowledge out of that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, last chance. Any other comments before we move on? We've been on this quite a while. Okay, thanks again for your presentation, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Chair and Council, and good day.
Moving on to item number 10, minutes of council. We have 3 sets of minutes there. Do we have a motion to adopt those? Councillor Arnold, second by Councillor Miller. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. And item number 11, correspondence. Under A, we have 12 items of correspondence to receive and file. Do we have a motion? Councillor Cook and Councillor Rumbouts. Councillor Broad, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Warden. I just wondered if maybe we shouldn't be supporting H, which is increase in funding from the province on hospital projects. I think that's a fair and fair request from I think it was the city of Bracebridge.
Okay, so we're going to pull item H. So receive and file all items except number H. All in favor? That's carried. And Councillor Broad, you want to move item H?
Yes, I do.
Okay, seconded by Councillor White. Further discussion? All in favor? That's carried. And Item B, correspondence from member municipalities. We have one from the City of Sarnia, and there's a recommendation here. How would you like to handle this? Councillor Bradley.
I would move we endorse this particular recommendation as Sarnia Council did.
Okay, we have a seconder. Councillor White. Any discussion? Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Warden Marriott, members of the County Council. I went through this. I didn't see a lot of background to give myself a good awareness of what the OLT did, what the issue was in the city, and why it's come to us. But we do have a major issue with a lot of things in our planning, not only possibly this one, but also a lot of things through the county official plan. We're very much in contrast to what the province wants us to do, to have more units available. And every turn that my municipality seems to make, we are being told that you can't do this from the county folks. So because of our official plan and the way they interpreted the PPS. So, I apologize. I don't have the background on this. I don't know what the situation was and what triggered this necessarily, but I just wanted to speak to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? All in favor of the sorry, Mayor Bradley, I didn't see your hand.
Just to respond to Mayor Arnold, I agree with what he's saying. And I've been long on the record when we had the Ontario Municipal Board of eliminating it. And this is the replacement that came along. And we're the only jurisdiction in North America, the only jurisdiction that has an appeal process that takes it out of the hands of local municipalities. And I don't know in your own communities, but we're getting appeals to LPAT, and we may be talking a year, maybe a year and a half for very complicated ones. And I expect it to happen with our official plan. And it just creates, it's no disrespect to lawyers, it's a lawyer's and planner's dream. And yet I believe in the end, the people that should be responsible are us, the ones that make the decisions, understand our communities. So that's what was behind this motion. And I noticed the province said they're going to put more resources to LPAT. They should just blow it up and let us plan, as Mayor Arnold's saying. And even I do have issues with the county too, that everything we're doing here as we go through our official plan is going to end up at the county and then probably at LPAT. So we take a lot of time and energy and we take all the input, but in the end, it's not our decision. So that's what is really behind this. It's a shock resolution. Whether it's going to happen or not, I don't know. It's probably unlikely because the province likes it, but I think we should endorse it.
Okay, Councillor Loosely.
Thank you, Warden Marriott. I also support this motion. I do have experience with the OMB and the OLT. Our municipality is being held up. I think there's some simple ones that could be done quickly. There's delays, and I think it does hold things up. And I certainly support this motion before us. Thank you.
Any other comments? We'll call the question. All in favor of the motion? Opposed? That carries. And there's no information reports at this time. Item 13, items not requiring a motion, is the Sarnia Lambton Economic Partnership Board Minutes dated November 23rd. And then item 14, reports requiring a motion, Public Health Services Division, Emergency Medical Services Department. Mr. Taylor and Mr. Turner report. And I guess, Councillor Weber, you have a motion?
Yes, I would move the recommendation in the report at this time.
Thank you. And seconded by, Councillor Rumboats had seconded it when we were going to do it. So any discussion? Question?
Do we need to add to that we would be doing an expanded strategic plan on this? I believe that's what you had mentioned. I just wanted to make sure it was clarified in the minutes.
I would add to that recommendation that any immediate changes that are recognized by staff to increase the performance be authorized to go ahead, and whether they need authorization to do that. But it just do us the safest thing for the county of Lambton and get it on with it regarding. So.
Okay, is that satisfactory to the seconder? Okay, any discussion on that? Oh, Councillor Broad.
Thanks, Warden. I guess my question is, when they do the review at the county level, are they going to include our municipality, which is serviced out of Chatham-Kent for the most part, or Newberry? It all depends where the situation is and where the ambulance is, because I didn't see any information in there on Don Euphemia, and I think that probably the reason is that we are serviced basically out of Chatham-Kent.
Mr. Taylor, would you be able to answer that?
Certainly, yes. There are regions of the county that are serviced from other areas. You're absolutely correct. So I would suggest that as part of this broad work with the master plan, that is a part of our new manager's goals and objectives to complete, would include some reference to those relationships with Chatham, Kent, et cetera, as you say.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments before I call the vote? Councillor Loosley.
Thank you, Warden Marriott. I just want to state that I think this is great, this motion for the County of Lambton, and I strongly support this. Thank you.
Thank you. All in favor of the motion? Oh, sorry, Councillor Bradley, did you have a question? You're on mute, sir.
I agree with going ahead with the planning that as many people in the room are supporting. But will this be a competitive process on any additional funding that's spent, or the master plan is going to continue with the same individuals and company?
Mr. Taylor, please.
So through you, Warden Marriott, yes, I would suggest that the recommendations of this report talk about how we will fund and pay for the initiative. And then with regards to some of the other scopes that have been added, there does need to be a competitive process for those portions. We have to follow county process to procure those pieces, but understand that some of this work will be done internally with use of internal resources as much as we're able.
Thank you very much.
All in favor of the motion? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. And item B, Corporate Services Division. We have 2 reports there dated April 6. Any questions, comments? Councillor White.
Thank you. Thank you, Warden Marriott. I would move the recommendation in Report A in terms of updating the policy in regards to reconsiderations.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Bradley. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? That's unanimous. And item 15, committee minutes. Oh, I'm sorry. Item 14B. We have 2 reports dated April 6 from Corporate Services. How would you, Councillor Rambouts, please?
Yes, thank you, Warden. I would move the recommendation in Report B.
Thank you. Seconder? Councillor Bird? Any discussion? All in favor? Oh, sorry, Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Just considering the travel and cost of gas right now, I'm not saying we should make it mandatory that we attend every meeting, but there could be consequences where it just could be feasible not to attend a meeting, so I guess you can still continue the way you are. More people may opt not to drive if gas prices keep going up the way they are, so just taking that consideration.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Mr. Tivo would respond.
Yes, I think the general rule is for in-person attendance, but with the option, of course, with what's going on now with the online attendance as well. And that council will recall that when you amended your rules, you did so on a trial basis, and that trial basis will expire at the end of this term.
Councillor Napper, and then Councillor Broad. You're on mute there, Councillor Napper.
Some of us, travel isn't an issue here. It's the social distancing and stuff like that there. And I know I'm in a high risk area, being 80 years old almost here. And some of council don't even think I should get the shot, but that's not the point. There should be a way that if you declare to hang out with somebody, I don't know how you do it, but we should be able to declare whether you're vaccinated or not. And I don't want to bring that up as an issue all the time, but then I can pick and choose where I want to go because I'm high risk and I'm a little weary about it. And I don't see the social distancing there and stuff like this here. I don't think this thing's over yet. So I'll still be coming from home until it gets a little more stable.
We'll go to Councillor Broad and then Councillor Rumboats.
Thanks, Warden. I just want to compliment staff. This is working excellent from my aspect down here. I was on a holiday and I am taking a few days just to quarantine away from other members, but hats off to staff. This is working absolutely fabulous. I wondered how it was going to be being the trial run, but your conversation's very clear. I hope ours is going back your direction, and thank you very much. It's working excellent on my behalf. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Broad. Just have to forgive me for not seeing those hands on the screen. Sometimes the hands blend in with the backgrounds. Councillor Rumboats.
Yes, thank you through you, Warden. I just wanted to make mention that Dr. Renedade has reported to County Council on more than one occasion that whether you're vaccinated or not, you can still contract the virus and transmit the virus. And therefore, I agree with Councillor Napper that everyone should have the option, because it doesn't matter what the vaccine status is of the people around you, there's still a risk. And so all of county councils should have the opportunity to protect themselves in their own way. And I don't see a problem with doing it with the hybrid here. It seems to be working out quite well. But it needs to be clarified that the vaccine is not stopping transmission, and we need to recognize that. So, and those who are at greater risk should have the right to isolate or to not come in social situations like this. I don't think it's fair to force anybody, and there should be no problem with that, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. Did we call the vote on that already? No. Okay. Any further comments before I call the vote? Councillor Arnold.
Well, thank you, Warden Marriott, members of County Council, and just a comment in regards to vaccinations. They were never touted as a preventative for everybody forever or for anything. It was always to keep you from dying and keep you minimal out of the hospital. And that's the way it's been, and Dr. Renedade's made that very clear all the way through this whole process. And I think we all need to make sure that we keep that in mind. I just received a call just before I came in that there was 2 people that are within 4 houses of me that just were diagnosed with COVID, and they've both been fully vaccinated. But it was never said that it wouldn't prevent the disease; it would just keep us from having to possibly pass away from the disease. So I think that's a good thing. I think it's great that everybody that doesn't feel comfortable being here can be at home. And I think that's very important, Mr. Warden. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other comments? Questions? We'll call the vote. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. That moves us to item 15, committee minutes. The first, item A, is Woodland Hearings Board minutes of February the 15th. Do you have a mover for those? Deputy Warden Hand, seconded by Councillor Arnold. All in favor? That's carried. And item B, the Committee AM minutes of February 16th. Councillor Arnold, please.
Board member, Warden Marriott, members of County Council, I present committee morning meeting minutes from February the 16th for your consideration.
Thank you. Number 1 is correspondence. Number 2 is information reports from Infrastructure and Development Services. Number 3 is under Public Health, correspondence received and filed. Number 4 is County Council endorsed correspondence. Number 5, same thing. And number 6, motion for the day's minutes tabled until public health modernization strategy is announced. Number 7, under information reports from public health. Number 8, reports requiring a motion, the motion from Lambton Public Health to be authorized to accept the one-time donations and grants. Number 9 is under cultural services, information reports. Number 10, under reports requiring a motion that Lambton County Council approve the following library policies. Number 11, the library's donations. Number 12 is report under the library joint facilities review. And number 13, a report regarding museums, gallery, and archives collections. Number 14, under corporate services, information report regarding returning to in-person meetings. And number 15, adjournment. Councillor Arnold, please.
Thank you, Warden Marriott, members of County Council. I move this day's minutes.
Thank you. Seconded. Councillor Weber. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Item C is the special joint meeting of the Standing Committee. Do we have a motion to adopt those? Councillor Miller, seconded by Councillor White. All in favor? That's carried. And item D, Committee P.M. minutes. Councillor Ferguson, please.
Thank you, Warden Merritt. To the rest of the council, I'd like to present the minutes from PM Committee, February 16th.
Okay. Number 1 is under long-term care division. The correspondence. Number 2, under information reports for the COVID-19 update. Number 3, report requiring a motion, the Adult Enrichment Center Advisory Committee. And under corporate services, number 4, information report regarding returning to in-person meetings. Number 5, under finance, facilities, and court services, information report regarding court services, fourth quarter 2021. And number 6, reports requiring a motion, the attached summary report on reserves and reserve funds. Number 7, regarding the tangible capital assets policy update. Number 8, under social services, information report regarding the 10-year capital asset management and funding plan. And number 9, information report regarding housing services comparative statistics. Number 10, information report regarding the Ontario Works caseloads stats update. Number 11, in camera. Oh, I'm sorry. Councillor Veen.
Thank you, Warden. Number 11, I guess I wasn't there that day. I thought I was, but I can't really make a motion if I wasn't there.
Okay.
You've got me on there as making that motion. We'll correct that.
Okay. So you were there or you weren't there? I don't think but this says you were there. Oh, at the top. Okay. We'll
Were you there? We will check the video and correct.
We'll correct it. Either way. Who's on second? Okay, so 11 and 12 and 13 were in camera. Councillor Ferguson, please.
Thank you, Warden Merritt. I'd like to move that these minutes be amended when needed. And for council, thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder? Councillor White. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Brings us to item number 16. We have no items tabled. And under item 17, we have 3 notice of motions. Number A is Councillor White.
Ward Mayor, thank you. In anticipation of what I expected to be my own absence for today, I withheld both motions and will present them at the next regular meeting.
Okay. And item B, Councillor Bird.
Thank you, Warden Merritt. So I'm asking for a resolution of council to instruct staff to write to Mary Lee Fullerton, Minister of Children, Community, Social Services, with a copy to the Deputy Minister and Premier Ford, requesting a realistic increase as soon as possible for those in receipt of ODSP and Ontario Works to enable these individuals to remain in independent living. If I can get a second, or I'll explain a bit further.
Councillor Arnold, seconds.
Thank you. So obviously, we all know the best way out of poverty is to work for those, but for those who have mental, emotional, or physical disabilities, this isn't always possible. I've had many calls from people receiving these benefits and who want to share their stories with me. No matter how carefully they budget, once their rent is paid, they would probably only have about $200 left per month to pay for utilities, food and toiletries, transportation, insurance, etc., which of course is not enough. And if they can't pay all their bills, they will sadly become homeless. Something has to be done about this because we can't afford to. We're doing really well getting the numbers down, but if people don't have enough money to survive and pay all the necessities, we're going to increase the homeless list again. So I'd really appreciate everyone's consideration for this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? Councillor Rumboats, please.
I'd like to hear from Ms. Calasanti on this, if that's possible, what her opinion is.
Sure. Ms. Calasanti, are you standing by?
Through you, Warden Marriott, to Councillor Rumboats. Social assistance rates have not been increased since 2018, and I think we all know the rental rates have increased significantly in the past number of years, as has inflation. So I think any increase to the Ontario Works and the ODSP rates would be welcome. For example, right now, an individual in receipt of Ontario Works gets $733 a month. $390 of that is for their rent. Average market rent in Sarnia Lambton is $1,200 for a 1-bedroom. So you can see a huge disparity. So even if they use their whole check of $733, they can't pay their rent, which is why there's such pressures on our food banks and our other social services. So even with all of the additional supports we provide to individuals to become housed, finance is the biggest barrier. So I would support any increase to the rates.
Thank you. Any other questions? Call the vote. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's unanimous. Thank you. Item number 18, other business. Is there any other business before this group today? Councillor Arnold, please.
Thank you very much, Warden Marriott and members of County Council. I'd just like to thank everyone for their kind words of comfort over these last couple of weeks. It's been very special for myself and my family. And I also had one other thing. It's an awareness item, and it's in regards for all of us that, and I'm not sure if everyone is aware of this or not, but we talked about it at our council meeting on Monday night. And over the last couple of years, that there's been a change in the education allotment to the commercial and in the industrial classes, and it's dropped substantially for them. And that's got to be picked up by anyone that owns a house in the farm and res class. And I think that I've asked Deputy Mayor Miller, or Councillor Miller, he put forward a motion the other day in regards to having us put a letter together to send off to the treasurer and also other MPs, and to see if we can get that reversed. Because in our case itself in St. Clair Township, there's going to be over $1 million of costs transferred over to the farm and res folks. And our budget isn't massive like the City of Sarnia budget is, but we do have a substantial amount of industry, we do have a substantial amount of commercial. And they're getting a tax holiday, and yet they can raise rates or whatever they do, making widgets or making gasoline or whatever, whereas people especially in the residential side, They have no way to raise funds to pay the extra burden that's going to be dropped on them because of the shift in the taxation policy by the provincial government. So I just wanted to make people aware of that if they didn't hear about it already, and that they should look into it and possibly see if they could do something as well to make the province stand up and listen and look after the people that make this province great the way it is. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Arnold. Any questions or comments from that? Councillor Broad, please.
Thanks, Warden. Maybe the St. Clair Township Council could send a letter out to all of us that we could endorse. Thanks for bringing that to our attention, Steve. I had heard some information on that, but by all means, if you've got a letter that you're putting forward, we would definitely endorse it at our municipality, and I'm sure the other remaining municipalities are very interested also.
Okay. Councillor Arnold indicated he would forward that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other business? Councillor Napper, please.
Yeah, could Steve repeat? I missed the first part where they're transferring it from. And also, while I'm on here, I want to, on the same note as Steve, thanks everybody for the last couple of months. It's really been helpful to us here, getting us through these difficult times. And I just want to thank everyone, and it's truly appreciated on my end. But if you could just repeat that, who it was.
Go ahead, Councillor Arnold, please.
Thank you, Warden Marriott, members of County Council. The download in the education component of the taxation was from commercial and all elements of industrial. And they went from, I believe it's a 1.33% down to a 0.88%. So almost a half a full point. And that's got to be transferred somewhere. And as Deputy Mayor Miller pointed out, that's going to end up with the farm and res. And that's why we're trying to put this together.
Okay, thank you for that. Is that good now, Councillor Napper? Okay, good. Any other business before we look at adjournment? Councillor Weber.
Thanks, Warden Marriott. And I've been reminded it's been almost 6 years since I sat on this side of the table in the chamber. And Councillor Arnold, who stands up to address the council, I think that's great. I don't know what the actual procedures are, if you're able, but I commend him for that. And I'd also like to extend a thank you to the warden, who's now back in the chair and enabled, and thanks for the guidance through the last year and a half. It's been a challenging time for everybody as we've met, but you've done a great job, and thanks. Carry on.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Weber. I must say, I had a little bit of a nervous night thinking about the first in-person meeting, especially with the hybrid, trying to watch the screen and everybody's hands at once. But I think it's going to work out great, and I'm quite happy that way this has worked out. But thank you for that, Councillor Weber. And thanks, everybody, for sticking through the last 2 years. Nerves were a little thin at times, but we always come through on a high point. So I seen a hand here, Councillor Rumbouts.
Yes, I just wanted to take a moment just to have a little brag for our community. We did have a young woman in our community who is a figure skater, has been figure skating in the Watford community for many, many years, and she advanced this year onto provincials and placed first in the short Star 9 program and first long gold women's program. So congratulations to Miss Emily Van Gorp, and we're so proud of her.
Great, thanks for letting us know. I hadn't heard about that. I seen a hand over here, Councillor Arnold.
Thank you very much, Warden Marriott, members of County Council. Maybe everyone can review, and I know it's been a while, as Councillor Weber had pointed out, Part 15 and 16 in our procedures manual, please. And if it needs to be changed, so be it. I don't have a problem with being changed, but you know the way I've always tried to do, Warden.
Thank you. Duly noted. Any other comments, questions before we entertain a motion? The next meeting is, bylaws. Sorry. Mr. Tifo, I'm still a little rough here.
No worries. Thank you, Warden Marriott. It's moved by Councillor Ferguson and seconded by Councillor Boucher that bylaws 8 and 9 of 2022 as circulated be taken as read a first and second time.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you.
It is moved by Councillor Boucher, seconded by Councillor Ferguson, that bylaws 8 and 9 of 2022 as circulated be taken as read a third and final time.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Now we can move to adjournments. Next meeting, Wednesday, May the 4th, with in camera at 9 a.m. Look for a motion. Councillor Veen, seconded by Councillor Loosely. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much.